Okay, welcome everybody to this morning's emergency executive. Before we start, just to make people aware, there will be a fire alarm test at 11:30 in the municipal buildings. So if you hear the fire alarm going off, it is just a test. Depending on where we are in the agenda, we may just have to pause for a minute to let that pass. I don't think we have any apologies, and we have a full complement. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. To the minute of the emergency executive held on the 20th of August. First of all, can we agree that as a true record?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Is there any particular matter arising that's not covered elsewhere in the agenda in relation to that minute? No, thank you. Thank you. Move on to first agenda item 4, which is early learning and childcare, 1140-hour expansion plan update, and I'll go to Mr. Naylor to speak to the report.
Thanks, convener. The report, as detailed in section 1.1, covers a number of things. One is an update on where we are with the expansion plans following the COVID lockdown. Some information on the key infrastructure projects that still are needing to be completed over the course of the next year. An update on the financial position, and also some information about the sustainable rate that's been agreed with private and partner nurseries. So the recommendations are stated there in 2.1, but I'll maybe just move through the main points of the report. So we had lockdown on the 23rd of March. What that meant for the construction industry, as members know, is that it came to a standstill. Over the course of recent weeks, the last couple of months, it's begun to open up again. But what that has meant is that in terms of the tendering that we had in train for a number of projects, the costs have gone up, partly due to the COVID restrictions for people working in building sites and so on. So whilst the projects were on hold, we just had to wait, and now we're in a situation where we're beginning to get prices back for some of the more significant projects, and what's happened is that the prices that have come back are higher than was originally estimated. So we were on track for August 2020, but we're now in a situation where, as previously reported, we've got about 75% of our ELC centres offering 1140 hours, with the remainder offering 736 hours. And later in the report, there's an appendix that indicates just what the time frames are for each of the remaining projects that we need to get over the line by the now new target date of next August. The most important bits to bring to your attention are the expansion at Madison Primary School and Denny Primary School. So you can see there in section 4.1 that what happened was that we had a tender received which was £300,000 more than was originally estimated. And similarly in Denny, we have a situation where what's come back in terms of both the expansion of the school and the provision of the early learning centre is 900,000 over the construction budget that was planned. These are both critical projects, and it's really important that we get agreement to proceed with them. And you can see in the bullets within both 4.1.1 and 4.1.2 that we have the resources to be able to do this by borrowing the additional capital funded by existing ring-fenced ELC funds. Now, since the report was written, we've actually got a slight change to the order in which this will happen. Members will know that elsewhere it was reported that the overall capital programme for the council is looking at an underspend for the current year. So what in fact will happen is that the underspend from the capital programme will go towards meeting these costs this year, and then it will be next year where the ELC funds will be used to top up capital for the overall council position as we get capital projects flowing more widely across the whole corporate capital programme. The main point is that we have the funds to do this, and there's no cost to the council, and the solution that I've just outlined, which is effectively borrowing from the underspend in the capital programme this year and putting it back next year, is the best financial solution for the council. As I mentioned earlier, there's an appendix at the end of the report which details where we are with the 10 other outstanding infrastructure projects, and we'll maybe get onto that later on. The next key bit of the report is that work has been ongoing for many months in terms of the hourly rate that will be paid to private and partner providers. And you can see there that we have agreed a rate with our partner providers of £6.5 an hour. That includes money for snack provision, and the new rate started in August because they were coming back before we had this meeting. In terms of the next section, the Scottish Government announced an 11.2 million support fund for private and voluntary nursery providers. That's for them to meet the costs, the additional costs that have been brought about by COVID, for example, to cover signage, social distancing arrangements, increased hygiene, just as we have done across the school estate. So Falkirk's share of that is £4,000, and there'll be an application process yet to be agreed that we will use to disperse those funds across our partner providers. Section 4.4 talks about our recruitment plans, and that is ongoing. You can see there that we've got an expansion overall of around 540 full-time posts in terms of the early years expansion. Section 4.5 gives an update in terms of the fact that we are now providing a lunch across all the ELC provision. Next section refers to the actions that have been taken, a number of actions that have been taken in terms of supporting and mitigating child poverty. And you can see there's a series of bullet points that indicate the various actions that have been taken over the course of the last number of months to address some of the challenges of that agenda. Section 4.7 seeks approval for the creation of 2 additional posts for the early years team. The justification here is that we are rapidly approaching a stage where we are going to have full implementation. There's a much increased workforce. There's going to be much further work required with both childminders and partner providers moving forward. And the posts have been suggested both in terms of supervising infrastructure and ongoing management of the whole early years provision as we get towards 1140 will significantly boost the capacity of the central team to make sure that we can keep this show on the road. There'll also be a significant role for the post holders that we're suggesting to revise and monitor what our offer is once we get to 1140 hours. That these posts can be funded from within the existing ELC ring fence monies. So it's proposed that they are created as soon as we can get them in post. We have continued to consult not just with council officers, but also with partner providers and trade unions and so on, and also are engaged continually with returns to the Scottish Government on where we are with our plans, and discussions with the Scottish Future Trust about our various different infrastructure projects. As I mentioned earlier, the overall financial position is good. The revenue funding is sufficient for us to be providing what we are providing, and the additional proposals within the report, paragraphs 4.1 and 4.7, can be met within the existing resources. And as I outlined earlier, in terms of the projects at Denny and Maddiston, we can adequately deal with the additional capital costs that have been signalled for us to meet. I'll stop there. I think members might have some questions about aspects of the report and possibly aspects of the appendix, but happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'll go to Councillor McHugh first to speak to the report.
Thanks, Robert. The report's very thorough as far as it's given us a clear update of exactly where we are and what we still have to achieve to finally get to our 1140. I think it's sad that we were on track, that work was working rapidly until COVID hit us, but you can see through the report there's a full recovery plan in action. I want to highlight the fact that 540 full-time equivalent posts have been created, and in this climate that we're in, I think that's a fantastic achievement. Not only have we created those 540 posts, but also on the back of that, there'll be extra posts as far as cleaning, catering, caretaking, and central staff services. So that in itself is fantastic moving forward. Also, I want to highlight the fact that we have supported to mitigate child poverty, and I think the early ELC can only be a positive for helping families that find themselves in a situation, especially coming out of COVID. I think I really welcome the fact that we have got most of our establishments up and running and with full 1140 hours to allow parents to get to possibly retrain or go into other types of employment due to the knock-on effect that the COVID-19 is having on us. I want to bring your attention, I don't know if any of you have the nurseries on Twitter, but obviously I do, and I want to bring your attention to the mitigating of child poverty. The last point says providing establishments with an extensive range of outdoor footwear and clothing for children. And some people might think that's not particularly important, but if you check it out, Queen Street Nursery up Calendar Woods the other day after the horrendous rain we had, and the hill that they normally have to climb to get to the spot where they build their teepees and they have their day of activities, had turned into a total mud hill. So instead of thinking, you know, well, maybe no bother with that, they turned it into a mudslide. And the children in their wellies with their full waterproofs on were sliding down this hill covered in mud, and it just looks fantastic. And the comments from parents and other staff alike are just brilliant. You can see the pure joy in these children's faces, and that's what early learning is all about. Yeah, we're covering the childcare area, and we're taking the pressure off parents to allow them to further their careers and support them. But the children themselves are just having a fantastic time, and that highlights the early learning throughout Falkirk. We've got such a dedicated staff, and the projects coming on board will just enhance that. Looking forward to all the different projects. It's unfortunate, as I've said, you know, that this has hit us, but looking forward to the rest of the projects, and hopefully at the end of it getting our woodland-based nursery. Thanks, Robert. Move the report.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. And with that, you'll move the recommendations? Yeah. Thank you. I think it's great to see that we've got this back on track. That there was never ever any doubt about our commitment to deliver 1140. Unfortunately, the aspects of COVID that came forward has knocked that back. But the fact that we have a plan, a good robust plan, and indeed a management plan to be able to support the whole early learning around the management and development going forward. As a credit to the work that the team have done, and under very difficult circumstances, in getting our kids back to school as well. So well done to Robert and his team. I'll open things up now for members' comments and questions. No. Councillor Reid.
Just to add my congratulations to the staff in particular undertaking this, what was a massive capital programme, and seems to have been accomplished to a very high standard as well. The additional COVID costs, are those mainly due to social distancing?
Mr. Naylor.
Primarily, yes, but there are costs around making sure that social distancing is organised. So, for example, children currently are still being kept in groups and away from others. So there's costs around signage, there's costs around hand sanitizer, increased cleaning costs. And so on and so forth. So the private providers need to put in place the same arrangements that we've put in place. So they will have expended elements of capital. You'll see that the fund that we have to disburse is not a huge amount of money, but it's recognition from the government that there are costs not just for ourselves, but also for partner providers. And I think the idea of this fund is that monies wouldn't need to be going from the council to private and partner providers, but they could put the same mitigation measures in place as are required across council facilities.
Just one other point, that the 540 plus jobs, of course, are to be welcomed. Is there any evidence that males are applying to work in nurseries to any great extent?
Not to a great extent, but there are a number that have come forward, and I think from memory, those that have been going through the college training course were probably not yet at 10%, but it's certainly a bit higher than what was previously the case, which was almost zero. So there are a small number coming through. And I think once that becomes established, then there ought to be a steady growth in that. One of the things that I think we would intend to do, if you think of the kind of Falkirk 5 approach, once we're up and running, we'll probably take the opportunity to showcase one or two of the male staff once they're in post and they're working with the kids and so on, because certainly from what I've heard on the ground, it's something that's very popular with the kids.
It's just that it's always been recognised that in some poorer families that there is no male presence during the childhood of, and that's why we used to encourage males to become primary school teachers. So I take it the same aim is that, simply to have a male enter some children's childhood for the first time.
Yep, and I think hopefully, if we're having this conversation in 5 years, we would have a workforce that is a little bit more reflective of that balance. I mean, I think even now, if you look at the primary workforce, it's overwhelmingly still female. But I think the new probationer programme that's been in place for the last 7 or 8 years, there probably has been a slight growth in the number of males coming forward into primary teaching. So we're kind of hoping that that's the same pattern that emerges in early years moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Okay.
Thank you, Pat. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, convener. Just a few questions, if I can. It's £800,000 is obviously a lot of money, and it's money we hadn't budgeted for or planned for. Fully appreciate that the increase is fully down to the effects of COVID. I'm just wondering if there's any chance of us being able to claim that back from the Scottish Government as part of the COVID funding. There's also the issue of the Calendar Park nursery. We've already parked that. That was going to be a considerable cost. We agreed to put that off to the end of the project to see what funds were going to be left, if there was going to be enough to cover that. With this additional 800,000, I'm not so sure there will be enough funding to cover that, and it would be a shame if we missed out on the Calendar Park nursery. Just in relation to the funded partner provider nurseries, do we, when we're giving out contracts for this, Robert, do we insist on them paying the living wage to their staff? I'm not very sure if we do or not. How much does it cost the council to provide a nursery place as opposed to the private sector? I'm just looking for a comparison there. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nimmo. Mr. Miller.
In terms of the £800,000 cost and whether that will come back from the government, there'll be a report going to council at the end of September that considers additional COVID costs across the piece. So, for example, we will be inputting there in terms of additional cleaning costs and other costs that have been incurred, and estimates of the costs that will apply for this financial year and moving forward. Through professional networks and discussions with COSLA, we are flagging up all the things where there will be an additional cost, and that will be captured at a council-wide level and fed back through COSLA and hence back to the government in terms of the overall COVID costs. So elements of that, once we receive whatever monies will come in addition to what's already come, would proportionately factor back into early years. In terms of the living wage, it's my understanding that the council does not have the authority to demand that. But what we have done, not just in Falkirk but across Scotland, is take a consideration of what is the appropriate hourly rate to be paid. That'll obviously be subject year by year to consideration of inflation, and the £6.5 that's in this report has been arrived at through negotiation and agreement with our partners on what we refer to as a felt fair basis. Perhaps Mr. Moody could comment on the specifics of the living wage detail, but it's certainly not something that, in terms of our contracting arrangements with the private and partner providers, that is a stipulation as far as I'm aware. In terms of cost per place, that's an extraordinarily difficult exercise to do, because of the way in which the budgets are organised and structured in terms of building costs, staff costs, different pay rates, and so on and so forth. It's something that I could ask for a bit of work to be done, but I can't give you an answer just now to say it is X pounds per hour per child within the council, vis-a-vis the £6.5 that's referenced in this report. But we can do some work to give you some idea of that comparison.
Thanks for that, Robert. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of folks wanting to come in now. I've got Councillor Kerr, then Councillor Colley and Councillor Harris.
Thanks, convener. Mr. Naylor answered a couple of questions that I had in his opening statements. So just to get it right, that the 800,000, 300,000 for Madison and the 500,000 for Denny will be covered by our capital programme?
In the first instance, yes.
Right, okay. Thank you, Robert. The additional 540 full-time employees, which is great for Falkirk area, will this be continually paid by Scottish Government going forward?
Yes. What I understand is that since the ELC expansion began, we've received, following all of our submissions around our plans and our estimates and our models for delivery, we received a grant from the Scottish Government for delivery of early years. It's my understanding that probably for the next 2 to 3 years, that will be a ring-fence grant as it is now. So these posts absolutely will be paid from the ELC grant that we get from the government. Moving forward, perhaps 3-4 years from now, it may well be that the government mainstreams that money and puts it to the council in terms of GEE, but at the moment, my understanding is that the government intends to continue to have that funding ring-fenced at least for the next 2 to 3 years.
Thanks, Robert. And this means that probably the schools and early years learning will be a massive part of Falkirk budget going forward, as
Yes.
it is at the moment, but it'll be even bigger.
Yes.
You answered the question about the. I was wanting to ask that. What Alan asked, what it cost, what other councils charge, where we're paying £6.5. What other authorities, what cost do they charge?
There's probably an envelope. Certainly aware of councils that are paying somewhere around the £5.90 mark. Others are perhaps paying as much as £6.40. This has been subject to national debate and discussion as well. Originally, the Scottish Government did an exercise back in 2017, and at that time, the kind of average that was understood was a rate of £5.31. But obviously, since then, we've had inflationary increases. We've also had the change in terms of meal provision, snack provision, and so on. So, taking all these factors into account, we've arrived at the £6.5, which has been agreed. I don't doubt that will continue to be the subject of ongoing negotiation, and I also would anticipate that the government at some point will do an analysis of the rates that are being paid across the country, and may well recommend a rate in the fullness of time. But at the moment, the arrangement was that this was to be negotiated locally, which is what we've done, and obviously it will be reviewed. Any changes to it will be reported back to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naylor. Thanks, Gravina.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Colley?
Just more a couple of comments. I'm pleased to see that ongoing partnership with the third and private sector nurseries, and that building up of a picture and a significant level of choice for parents, because and what best meets their child's needs. So I think it's very important those partnerships continue to be a positive one, and I think should welcome the work that the officers have done to make that happen. Just on a general parochial note, I'm very pleased to see the work around Denny Primary School, and I hope that members will support that. Just not that long before lockdown, I was a meeting at the Parent Council and the head teacher talking about the real challenges of getting the school ready for the work that we're doing. So I'm sure they'll be very pleased for that work to be going ahead.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Colley. Councillor Harris?
Yes, thanks, Peter. Much of what I was going to ask has been asked. However, just an observation that if you take away the 15 pence in respect of the additional COVID-related costs, which are, quote, on a short-term basis, an actual payment to the private providers is 590, which puts us at the bottom end of the envelope compared to some other councils. I had previously asked about the cost per hour for the council and got the same response. I know that Joan would support this, but if we had zero-based budgeting, we would be able to work this out easily and see clearly the principle that the money is following the child, because at the moment, the only money that we know is following the child is the 590 or the £6.5, which is going to our private providers, but we don't know exactly how much it is costing per child per hour for our own organisation. So I think we really need to kind of start trying to get a handle on that. It's a very expensive exercise. We want to see that the money's spent correctly. So I would encourage Robert to perhaps look at this issue of the complex of the accounting, but we really do need an answer about how much it costs per hour per child.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harris. If there's no one else, are we happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. We moved to item 5, which is the Children's Services update on schools and early years establishments reopening. So it's back to Mr. Naylor.
Okay, members will recall that a fortnight ago I gave a verbal update on the reopening of schools, which at that stage was relatively early in the process, and it was agreed at the executive before last that we would bring a written report on the progress that had been made. So the report is in front of members today. I don't know that there's a huge amount in the report that members are not already cited on in terms of the verbal update that I gave a fortnight ago. But the recommendations there, you can see it at 212, the considerable work that was undertaken in terms of risk assessments, which I'm sure I've discussed with you previously, and the various arrangements that were put in place around social distancing and so on. So just very quickly in terms of the background, again, members are aware of the various changes that took place over the course of the summer in terms of the expectations when schools would reopen. We always knew that was going to be from the 11th of August. We knew that the other side of the summer, but then the intention that we had and had agreed in terms of the phase soft start was then changed by a further announcement by the Scottish Government, which meant that we had to have a full return on the 17th of August. That 17th of August return duly took place. And again, as previously discussed, we opened for children on Wednesday the 12th, and with the exception of a school being closed because of the storms overnight from the 11th to the 12th, we had all schools open bar one, and then on the Thursday we had a fire at Lauriston, but other than that all schools were open and running during that first week, which was our soft start week. Thereafter, all all pupils return to all schools on the 17th, and that has been the case ever since. So if I can move to section 4.3, again, as previously discussed verbally, our transport arrangements got up and running satisfactorily in the first week. Concerns that we had about how they would operate when we had full transport proved to be perhaps not unfounded, but we certainly managed to get all of the buses running as we had hoped, and we managed to make arrangements such that all the children that required transport with additional support needs in terms of taxis and so on, through a number of different approaches and measures, that was satisfactorily addressed, and children are getting to and from school in taxis and the use of additional buses and so on and so forth. The change in transport that happened effective 3 days ago was, as members will know, there was a further change to the guidance which required that pupils in secondary schools are required to wear face coverings when in corridors and when in social spaces. So that came into effect on Monday, but it was also required that children using school transport would be required to wear face coverings effective Monday, the 31st of August. So that took place at the start of this week. To the best of my knowledge, we have had no major issues around the use of face coverings by pupils, and schools are again adapting to that change, as are the children and young people. We continue to monitor the arrangements, and again, as discussed a fortnight ago, we've been working very effectively with the trade unions. We have a weekly meeting with them on a Friday afternoon where we pick up any issues that have emerged over the course of the week. Obviously, any major issues that occurred on a day-to-day basis, we are discussing with the trade unions as and when they arise. But we have a weekly catch-up where we review both any changes that are coming in terms of national guidance and any local issues that have been identified that need to be addressed and agreed. When we spoke a fortnight ago, members were asking about the arrangements should there be any outbreaks, and paragraph 4.7 there outlines the process that we have in terms of any prospect of either a year group being closed or a school being closed. And I think the important thing to note here is that any decisions around either a year group or one class being required to self-isolate or indeed for a school to close, that advice would come from public health and we would act on it. I think it's probably important for members to understand that there's been a changing and emerging picture over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks in terms of concerns around children being symptomatic. Over the course of the first couple of weeks, we had obviously prepared our staff to be extraordinarily vigilant, and the advice from NHS Forth Valley was essentially to be taking no chances with this. So what happened in the first couple of weeks was that there was a significant number of children who were required to go home and then be referred for testing because they had displayed one of the symptoms or perhaps two of the symptoms associated with COVID. So what happens in those situations is that the children are isolated, their parents are contacted, the parents then get advice from the NHS. If they're tested and negative, they can return to school. The situation would be, were they to be tested and found positive, then they would go through the standard self-isolation protocols. However, thus far, we have had no positive cases in children in school. I'm aware of one case where a school child tested positive, but the contact tracing element established that that had been through a weekend contact out of school. So we have had no confirmed cases of children being positive in school. What then began to emerge was that the NHS were, given that they were having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of negative tests from across Forth Valley, what the Scottish Government then did last week was they issued a letter, sorry, at the start of this week, they issued a letter drawing the distinction between essentially the common cold and reiterated the importance of the three key symptoms of COVID. So actually what we have seen is that the number of children that are being referred for testing is beginning to fall, not just in Falkirk, but across Forth Valley. At the time of writing the report, which was after the first full week back, and I think I'd reported this a fortnight ago when I was speaking about this, I was telling members that the attendance rate was 97%. Unfortunately, I have to report that this week it's just under 90%, so there has been a drop-off as the schools have bedded in. I think that is in part due to the fact that children were being sent home, and I suppose concerns among the parent population that children that were being sent home actually had COVID, when in fact the reality is that they don't. So I anticipate that the attendance rate will begin to climb again in the next few weeks. Section 4.9 sets out the additional funding that we've had from the Scottish Government to date. Principally, that's been to recruit and or retain additional teachers, and a small element of that funding relates to us being able to recruit and extend the hours of our additional school support staff. Costs that will be quantified, and I would refer back to one of the answers I gave when we were talking about the early years report. We do have additional cleaning costs, additional costs in terms of PPE, supplies and equipment, additional transport costs. We are working to quantify what these will be. Part of that is knowing how long we will need to have this in place. We anticipate it's for the remainder of this financial year at least, but potentially moving forward, the increased cleaning regimes will need to be maintained for some time to come. But that's work in progress. But you can see there that there is a fund, but we don't yet know what our allocation of that will be. The remainder of the report gives further commentary on the work that is ongoing around finance and resources, and as I mentioned earlier, paragraph 5.3 refers back to the significant work that's been done in terms of first of all the risk management in terms of getting the buildings reopening and the arrangements in place for pupil movement, for hygiene, for hand washing, and so on and so forth. And I already mentioned the extensive work that we've done with trade unions to make sure that they are involved in the process, they agree with the measures that are put in place, and they are working collaboratively with us around any changes that are required as national guidance changes. So, as discussed previously, significant work over the course of the summer, now looking forward to returning to a much more steady state. Been meeting with both primary and secondary head teachers this week, and my sense is that day by day confidence is rising both among the staff population and the pupil population, and we're hoping that in the not too distant future we are able to relax rules around, for example, PE indoors, and if we do get to phase 4, that'll have a big impact on what we're able to do in terms of school meal provision and having children in assembly halls and dining halls and so on. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. That was an extensive bit of feedback, and I thank you for that. But I'll go to Councillor McHugh.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Robert. As Robert highlighted at the beginning of his report there, that most of the information in the report was spoken to verbally at the last meeting a fortnight ago. A bit of update there that we welcome. I think we were all expecting a bit of a drop once our children got back in, and the climate at this time of the year, there's often various infections, and I really reach out to the staff and head teachers that are having to make these calls, and the parents that are dismayed when they get that call. I've had a couple of parents on myself in the last week that are concerned. So I appreciate the information that Robert's given us here today. I just want to highlight really in the report 4.9, I think additional costs, Scottish Government funding. I think that clear, the way it's been laid out, and it clearly shows that our government is clearly committed and are putting money into the councils to be able to combat any extra costs that we need, and I really welcome that. And yet again, enabling us to recruit more staff at a time where people are losing their jobs. So saying that, I'd just like to remove the report with the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. I've had an indication from Councillor Colley. Who wants to come in to ask a question? Councillor Colley?
Yes, Robert, it's just to clarify something, and you may well have covered it in relation to the information for parents around, I suppose, how to assess that whether something is the common cold or is the symptoms of COVID. I know there's been quite a lot of work done at NHS for Valley and Parent Club and that sort of thing. You talked about a letter that came out. Was that letter to the schools? And if so, is there a further communication to parents to help them make, because I mean, it's really difficult judgments for parents to make, but just to help them, because you know there's quite a lot of information now becoming available through Parent Clubs. I just wanted to double check that.
Robert, you're on mute.
The letter came to us from the Scottish Government, but the letter was written by Jason Leach, and it was then distributed to all parents. So it seeks to draw, and it's a difficult thing. It seeks to draw the distinction between the 3 COVID symptoms and just having a runny nose, or perhaps having sickness and diarrhea. So it points out that if you've got sickness and diarrhea, you still shouldn't go to school until 2 days after it's finished. But if you've only got a runny nose and you don't have the cough, you don't have the temperature, then you know you can still send your child to school if they're fit to go. So I mean, I actually thought the letter was quite a good letter, and probably quite reassuring for, as Councillor McHugh was saying, when parents get a call to say that the school want them to come and collect their child because they think they might have COVID, that obviously can be quite alarming. And then later, once tested, you know, the sense of relief that, you know, they don't have and they can go back to school. I mean, the disposition of our colleagues in NHS, Forth Valley Public Health, were, I suppose, understandably in the first weeks back, to take a better safe than sorry approach. And our head teachers and colleagues in schools did did do that. So there's been hundreds and hundreds of in fact probably thousands of children tested across Scotland. But even at the national level, there are very, very few positive cases. And to the best of my knowledge, the reportage so far is that nobody has established that there's been any in-school transmission, and any positive cases among the young population have been tracked back either to familial contacts or other social gathering contacts out with school.
Thanks, Robert. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. I have received this letter, and it's very clear and very helpful. And speaking as somebody whose young boy has had to stay off school there for a couple of days, there is the common cold that's going about now is quite severe, and it's affecting pupils. And I think there's quite a bit of stomach bugs that are going about now that are affecting pupils and having them to stay off. So I think that might have affected the 90% of that we're down to now, Robert. I think you'll find that as it goes along. Just if I can just leave, and it's about getting the kids back to school. And I've just received another email, because the communication from the schools has been exceptional over this period, I have to say. And one of the paragraphs here just says, the children have all settled in well and have adapted to the new arrangements splendidly. We are very pleased and proud how the children have adjusted. It hasn't been easy for them, or for any of us. Our primary ones have also been super, as I'm sure you've noticed on Twitter. So that's coming directly from a head teacher of one of the primary schools in Denny just now. So that gives a bit of testament to where we are and the good work the service has done in getting us here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to ask Robert about testing. A couple of constituents that were in touch, they were told they need to Aberdeen, Carlisle, I can't remember the other place, Forfar, I think it was. The child and they would have to go so far afield to get a test done. Finally managed to get a test done at Abbotsford House, which makes because testing it, and if people won't have to go to Carlisle or Forfar to get a test done. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bissett. And you know that we were in contact over that case earlier this week. My understanding is that the arrangements that are in place for all of the tests that have been done in Forth Valley are being done locally. I don't know that there's an intention for Forth Valley Public Health to be making those requirements. I think in terms of the way that the testing is emerging and evolving across the country, there are arrangements being made for different workforces to be being tested on block. And I think perhaps on particular days that means that the capacity at individual test sites is reduced. So if people were looking for a test and were contacting NHS 24, their brokerage of that was getting back to individuals and making what I think probably we'd all agree are ridiculous offers to take children who are potentially unwell hundreds of miles to get a test. But it's certainly my understanding, following our earlier discussions this week, that the intention of NHS Forth Valley is that the testing would be A, available quickly, and B, be local. So I hope that problem has been resolved. I think it was the subject of questions to the First Minister a week or so ago, when it first arose that people were being asked to travel extraordinary distances. So I think NHS are on the case with that, and hopefully we won't hear of any other parents being asked to go to far-flung places to get their kids testing when they're already worried.
Thanks, Robert.
Councillor Nimmo?
Just 2 or 3 questions for Robert, convener, if I can. As far as the Scottish Government is concerned in public health, Robert, do we have a direct link with public health, or do we have to go through Edinburgh? That was the first question. As far as identifying COVID cases in school, what training have teachers been given in this respect? Because a lot of the common cold symptoms could be the same as COVID and vice versa, so it could be really difficult to make a decision in that respect. But I'm just wondering what training they've had. What would happen if a child is sent home by a teacher suspecting COVID and the parents turn around and say, well, we don't think we need a test? What happens in that scenario? Thanks, convener.
Okay, Robert.
Okay, first of all, yes, we do have a direct link with NHS Forth Valley Public Health. My colleague David Mackay is on a conference call with counterparts from Clackmannanshire and Stirling, and the Director of Public Health for NHS Forth Valley, and one of the experts in this field every morning. We get an update on the overall testing across Forth Valley and the results, and also discuss any emerging issues. So that was put in place prior to the schools returning, and has been operating on a daily basis ever since they went back. There are no current plans to step that down. It will continue on a daily basis until further notice. In terms of training for staff, the training is the discussion in and around the guidance which we have issued, which is based on the Scottish Government guidance, and it's very detailed. And like I said, what head teachers and other school staff were encouraged to do from the outset was, if in doubt, get the parents to come and take the children home and get a test. As I alluded to earlier, what that meant was that there were probably many children that just had a bit of a cough, didn't have a temperature, didn't have the other symptoms, but they were being sent home and asked to get a test. You asked specifically about parents who say, I'm not getting my child tested. That's their prerogative, but what we seek to do is have them engage with NHS Public Health. If they are still not inclined to have their child tested, then the child doesn't get back to school for 2 weeks. So, you know, the two alternatives are you get a negative result or you quarantine for 2 weeks. So if the school have sent you home and you refuse to get a test, then you don't get back in for 2 weeks, but then you do get back in.
Thanks very much for Robert, that's appreciated.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
Convener, thank you very much. On the issue of the location of the testing equipment, etc., just to add to what the director has said, it's coming up with all kinds of, or it was coming up with all kinds of crazy suggestions with regards to the nearest centre. That's because the manner in which the vacancies that each of the centres have become available. And so it depends very much on the time of the day that you actually apply. So I'd urge Mr. Bissett to let his constituent know that the different times of the day when they apply could actually be the difference between getting a test and not a test. And saying that, I think that the department at all levels deserve nothing but praise for the manner in which this has been dealt with. The getting back to school is a difficult enough process where you've had the normal summer holidays. At least it was for me. I was 17 and still getting hauled along to the school. I think the department's done an excellent job. When you add on the extended summer break for kids, and the strangeness of it all, and the whole shebang, it's reassuring to know that educationalists are on top of the situation. And congratulations to the director. They've done a marvellous job, and that should be acknowledged. Also, I think being fair, I know that Dana has been very active for the last few weeks. And she's been very active for a long time, but particularly the last few weeks with regards to her responsibilities, and it's how a spokesperson should behave and should act. And again, sort of be churlish just to miss giving praise to Adana. With that, Kieran, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, convener. Sounds like David's got a bit of the cold, and he must have some memory if he can remember back when he was 17.
Not about 10 years.
We're not getting any younger. Thank you, convener. Mr. Naylor, a couple of quick questions for me. With regards to the 4.91 additional teachers, do we know if this is just a 1 year thing for the temporary recruitment? And have you got a breakdown if it's primary or secondary schools? That's it. First, I think I've got another one, but I've got another one, but I'll wait till the answers this, convener. Thanks.
Okay, so yes, this is for this financial year, or should I say this? I understand it's for this school session. So it is one off at the moment, and like I said earlier, there are ongoing discussions within COSLA and between COSLA and the Scottish Government about all of the additional costs that are arising because of COVID. If COVID continues and we are required to have the same restrictions and social distancing measures and etc. in place, then I would anticipate that there would be a further bid, certainly from local government to national government, for additional funds beyond this. But the short answer to your question is yes, this is one-off funding at the moment. In terms of the additional posts, I can give you a breakdown. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. It's approximately 50-50. But one of the things that we did in particular in primary school was staff that would perhaps have been coming to the end of their contracts that were on temporary contracts last year. Those contracts were automatically extended, and we also took on an additional 42 from memory probationers that met the threshold for our employment. So I think it says here circa 50. The last time I was looking at the detail of it, I think it was 55.4. So these staff are on the ground, they're in post just now, but it is for a 1 year period.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. And I don't know if you'll know this or if you'll know, Robert. How many children have put themselves forward, or their parents put themselves forward for a test? percentage-wise?
Don't know that I can give you a percentage. I think our running total of children tested from Falkirk schools a couple of days ago was around the 800 mark. So if you consider our overall population being, I think, around 25,000, it's probably 3 or 4% maybe. But that running total of 800, at its peak, we were having something like 150 children a day. The last time I looked at the figures, it's dropped from then down to 120, then down to 100, then down to about 80. So I think currently we're probably talking about 60, 70 a day. But as confidence rises and as the impact of the letter that Councillor Garner referred to is understood, both staff and parents are more confident that children have a cold. One of the things that the letter points out in quite a lot of detail is that the COVID cough that's been referred to for many months, what Professor Leach has made much more clear is that is actually a continuous cough. So the person with it would be coughing in bouts of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, perhaps even an hour, where they're just endlessly coughing. It's not, as was assumed, I think initially when schools went back, if a child is coughing in the way that we've all experienced a kind of normal cough and cold, where you're maybe coughing, every 2 or 3 minutes, it's been made clear that the COVID cough is actually a sustained, quite severe bout of coughing. And I think as people begin to understand more, then that's partly why the number of children being referred for testing is lower. To the best of my knowledge, if parents are of a mind to have their children tested, that's not done through the school, that's done by the parent contacting NHS Public Health themselves. If a parent came to the school and said, "I want my child tested," we would only progress that if there was evidence that the child had symptoms. So we would be discussing with the parent what the process would be for them to get their child tested voluntarily.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor, and I'd just like to thank you for the report and the team for the way you continue to keep us updated. I think it's important that these early stages that we understand how our schools are progressing, because it's not easy for you because things change daily, weekly. So the way that your team adjust to the adjustments to be commended, and I hope you take it from the Conservative group back to your members. Thank you very much, Mr. Naylor. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. You were the last on my list. There's no other member. Are we content to agree the report? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 6, which is the Treasury Management Strategy, and Mr. Sneal.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. I know it's always a treat for members when there's a Treasury report on the agenda. The rationale and purpose of the report and the framework, indeed, causing it to come before you, is set out in the front section of the report, section 1. We'll come back to the recommendations at section 2. Section 4 paints the economic picture. I won't dwell on it. Clearly, at the national level, the national finances are under considerable pressure. We all know that. Insofar as Treasury goes, the key aspect of national policy that's of relevance is interest rates, and you can see at para 4.7 the projections set out there. A climate of low interest rates has been with us for an abnormally long period now and looks set to continue for several years at least yet. The framework of this report is consistent with other financial reports that you've had hitherto in this financial year, whereby the 1920 position has integrated into the current position, obviously because of COVID issues. So Section 5 sets out a summary of the 1920 position, the year just closed. Those contained in Appendix 1. The borrowing requirement hadn't moved very much from what you had last received, as illustrated by para 5.2, the little table there. And on the investment side, maybe just noting at 5.8, at the end of the financial year, we were sitting with some 35 million in investments. That's a snapshot in time. The position today would be more than double that by way of illustration. So it ebbs and flows, and there's the potential indicators that we're required to produce in the appendix. So in terms of the current financial year, which obviously is one of particular interest, that's set out in Section 6. The structure is the same as the preceding section: borrowing and investment and prudential indicators. The table at para 6.2 summarises our overall debt position, just short of 280 million debt. But bear in mind that debt has financed new council housing, roads, schools, and the rest. So there's real assets behind that. Para 6.4 sets out the estimated borrowing requirement. As you know from the recently presented capital report, there's significant slippage, and that will impact on the actual level of borrowing taken during the course of the current year. The Public Works Loan Board, PWLB, remains the main source of borrowing for the council. And towards the end of that section, para 6, 9, 10 and 11, you can see a little subset of particularly attractive PWLB interest rates that are available to us and which we avail ourselves of. Moving on to the investment strategy, which is para 6.12 and beyond, and starting with the framework that members, I think, are well familiar with now in terms of a prudent approach. The focus is on the security of the money, who we're lending it to, the period we're lending it to, and only then do we turn to the third strand in the equation, the actual return we get. So the focus, the tilt, very much directed towards prudence. The subsequent paragraphs there, 6.14 in particular, set out the framework as to who we may lend to, and that's supported by appendices to the report. And draw your attention to para 6.16, particularly cash rich at the moment, perhaps perversely so, but it's a position most councils are facing, which in turn gives you difficulty of placing the money in the market. So that's something that we're having to review, but it's not a problem unique to us, and we'll update you in the next report as to where that sits. The Treasury indicators are set out in para 6.2.1, and again, they're geared to just give members comfort that the Treasury operation, given that it's dealing with very big numbers, as was indicated from some of the comments I've already made, to give you comfort that it's operating within a robust and sound sound framework. I'll skip over Treasury advisors. We do have Treasury advisors, always have had Treasury advisors. It's a very specialist area. The Loans Fund, section 627, para 627 onwards. I apologise for the detail that's set out there, but the regulations require us to include that, and indeed the related appendix. And it's essentially just dealing with the Loans Fund, which is effectively an internal bank. We borrow on, well, either on the market or from the Public Works Loan Board, and effectively, in turn, lend that out to services, and they build houses, they maintain the roads, they build schools, and the services, their revenue accounts and budget repay this council central bank, and we in turn then repay who the money had been lent to us by. So it's fairly straightforward, but some big numbers involved. This section also picks up on the position that you may recall from previous reports, where we had a bit of a different opinion with our good friends, the auditors, in terms of our capacity to reprofile debt with the ultimate aim of helping the revenue account. Ultimately, Audit Scotland came round to the same view as council, so for the most part that's been resolved and is helpful in terms of us helping to manage the pressures on the revenue budget. We pick up on sections 35, the outstanding of members training. I know a number of members had expressed interest in a further set of training. COVID has clearly interrupted that, but we'll come back to you with a way forward on that. So if I just jump back to the recommendations, the suite of recommendations sitting at the very front end of the report. I won't go through them all, you can see them for yourselves, but maybe just noting 2.2 there, the requirement to refer this on to council. Though the timing of that, I think a bit of flexibility can be allowed, knowing the particular pressure looming in terms of agenda items for the forthcoming September meeting. So I'll stop there, convener. Happy to try and address any observations that members may have.
Thank you, Brian. I think it's quite useful to have this report coming at this time, knowing that we're going to have to look to review both our capital and revenue budgets as we go towards September. So I think this helps to put things in a bit of context. I'm going to go to Councillor Bowes first. Gary?
Thank you, Convener. I am working on Citrix, that's why I've dropped my camera, so to hopefully get through this without me freezing, so hopefully people can hear me. So thank you, Convener. And first I can say good afternoon to Mr Smale, normally very accurate. Can I first thank the Chief Finance Officer for this report and his usual diligence in reporting and handling of such matters. The lending and borrowing of our Treasury section happens every day and has always done so. At present, we have very low interest rates to borrowing, particularly in the Public Works Loan Board. However, this is a double-edged sword, and as much as we can borrow at very low rates, on the other side, we get very little return on our current investment portfolio. Due to the trading conditions, in no small part due to this pandemic, we have reached a point where we could almost have to pay organisations to take our investment. The current investment fund, as Brian has alluded to, is approaching £100 million. This remains fluid and can change daily. So how do we make this money work better for Falkirk Council and the people we represent? Always remembering to keep one eye on the revenue budget and obviously affordability. Borrowing in advance of capital spend is governed by regulations at a point that it should not really happen, and therefore just borrowing without detailed plans of what it agrees agreed to be used for is not acceptable. If we had an extensive capital requirement this time to fund projects to bring more efficient green services and facilities to the people of Falkirk, we could benefit from the low interest rates on the borrowing side and also benefit from lower operational costs for these modern facilities. There is a current 5-year capital programme in place. However, there are numerous projects awaiting political agreement, which could not only allow this council to catch up with the many years of underspend, but allow us to lead in the green digital revolution and the recovery period from this pandemic. We could then we would then not be borrowing in advance, which would comply with the regulations and would allow this council to act progressively in improving the society we live in at a time of deep distress for a number of people in Falkirk. We, of course, could do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bounce. I'm happy to formally move the report and including that this be referred to Council as part of the suite of reports that are in front of members. I'll open it up for any questions or comments. Councillor Reid and then Councillor Nimmo.
Thank you, Convener. I don't want to disappoint Brian that nobody's, if he's thinking nobody's listening, I think never has this report been more important, to be honest. 4.6 and 4.7, Brian, which seems to sum up the current position. I notice the Bank of England are considering the use of a negative interest rate. Do you think that's at all likely to happen?
With rates at 0.1%, they're guy close to moving into that territory. I mean, it's perverse and just reflects the crazy world that we've now moved into, and it's not theoretical. Some countries are already in negative interest rates, Japan being one. I know there's a reluctance to move into that territory. I think perhaps as much as driven by the psychology of it and the messages it's sending, rather than necessarily the direct economic impact it has. But it's a course of action that could be taken. Of course, the Bank of England's been heavily involved for some time now. I mean, indeed, going back to the financial crisis in 2008, of being active in the market through quantitative easing, and that's still very live at the moment. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I know, having read comments from the Bank of England and commentators generally, there's a reluctance to just cross that threshold.
So how do you explain negative interest rate to a layperson like myself? Does that mean they're paying you to lend the money?
With some difficulty, I think. I mean, that's effectively at its core what it means. That what you then invest is eroding, because you're paying to have somebody to look after the money. But I mean, if you take at the moment, the reality, I've got money out at the moment that's earning 0.8%. That's less than 1/10 of 1%. And that it's, that doesn't even amount to peanuts. Just how close you are to the point where you're getting paid virtually nothing for money to be taken, and it's not too much of a leap to think from that position you're just marginally above 0%, that actually we don't want your money, and if you want us to have it, well, you're going to have to pay us to have it. So it just turns everything on its head, convention on its head, and it's understandable that people would be confused by that, but it's just I think one way to look at it is just a signal, or it would be a signal of just how challenging the financial environment is.
Yeah, as was pointed out at budget time, we tend to be under borrowed, certainly compared to other local authorities. Councillor Bowes referred to it as well. There is the temptation to borrow, but to borrow wisely, one assumes. I take it this will not quite dominate the meeting on the 30th of September, but will be very relevant what we do with that position, whether we go for more borrowing or stay where we are. Am I speculating wrongly?
I think the first thing, Councillor Reid, here is to understand what under borrowing means. Yeah. It doesn't mean we are not investing in assets. What it does mean is that the assets that we previously have invested in, all the sorts of things I mentioned earlier, council housing, schools, etc., per the capital programme, they've gone ahead. What's happened is because at those particular points in time, as indeed is the case now, we're sitting with surplus cash. So why go to the market to borrow money at a higher rate than you're currently getting from lending that money out? So all we're doing is sensible housekeeping, rediverting that spare cash with a positive interest differential between lending and borrowing, and using that to finance the capital programme. So the key thing is it's having no impact whatsoever on the investment, the capital investment that's taking place. All it is sitting behind it is the means by which it's been financed. And what we'll do and have been doing over time, having elected at those particular points in time for good reasons to use spare cash, as our cash profile changes, we'll substitute borrowing and restore what would have been the position you would normally have expected in the first place. But I come back to the key point: it has had no impact on the level of investment that takes place. And picking up on the related point, when we do come to September and an updated capital position as a precursor to the budget position some 6 months, 5-6 months after that, members will need to, as they always have to do, look at the overall financial picture in terms of aspirations. What are your priority projects? And of course, we have new emergent priorities that will help members direct resources, whether they be capital or revenue, towards those designated and dedicated priorities, having an eye to the resources that we have available, and also recognising, as you well know, that ultimately capital expenditure flushes through to revenue, and we know the pressure that the revenue budget's facing. So a number of variables in the mix there that members need to have regard to in configuring a capital programme going forward.
Okay. Just another couple of points, Convener. On 6.11, the PWLB have introduced an even lower rate for social housing. Did we take advantage of that?
Yes.
We did. Right. Okay. That's a good answer. 6.28. I think this one's about the loans fund. I didn't realise this system was peculiar to Scotland.
Yeah, it's England also had it for, well, always had it, but some time back they changed, and their overall financial system moved to a different reference point, but it still remains in Scotland, and I don't think there's any particular indications of that changing.
No, it seems to work satisfactorily.
Yeah. And as I say, in its essence, it's very simple. We go to the market, borrow money to meet the needs of our capital investment programme. that in effect internally is linked to the service, education to build schools, development services, to build bridges, progress roads, etc. And because they've received the money, they'll build into their revenue budget over X number of years an amount to repay that. And then in turn, we, when the amount's due, repay the PWLB who we borrowed it from in the first place. So it's circular. But basically, if you think of the council running an internal bank is probably the simplest way of viewing it.
Final point, convener, just more training, please, for us, especially in this climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nimmo.
Just a quick question for Brian, convener. We're being asked to adopt and approve the contents of this report. Brian, what's left for full council to agree?
I think the purpose of getting it to council is the view that the activity taken under Treasury is so significant that it should stretch, our knowledge or awareness of it should stretch beyond just a particular committee such as this one that's dealing with it, and that all members of the council have an opportunity to be aware of what's happening. And if you think back to various instances over the years, or indeed over the decades, where there's been big problems, you go right back to Hammersmith and Fulham in the late 70s, 80s with the use of derivatives swaps. You think of BCCI, where the Western Isles, not the only one, badly hit, and perhaps most recently the Icelandic banks, where things have gone badly wrong. And I think on the back of that, it acted as an impetus for the relevant codes to make sure that members had a better handle on what was happening, which picks up in Councillor Reid's point about training and the wider awareness that comes from at least all members at council having that awareness.
In that case, Brian, would it not have been better just putting this report direct to full council instead of coming to the executive?
I think the idea is that by committee, the members on this committee can give it more direct focus, and so the particular scrutiny, if we like, is taking place on this platform, whereas the council reference is just a wider awareness of what's happening. So I think there's two linked, distinct elements in the mix there.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you. This is the method of taking forward the Treasury management strategy in the past. It's come to the executives first and then gone on to council. So it's not deviating from what we've used in the past. Okay, as there's no other members indicated, are we happy to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. Final item is the land exchange at Grangemouth Road, Falkirk. And can I welcome Mr. Douglas Duff in his new role as acting director. And Douglas will take the report.
Thanks, convener. So this report relates to our work on the Falkirk TIF and is to help us to progress work relating to the upgrade of the A904 and the Westfield roundabout. And it relates to a request to exchange 2 pieces of land at Grangemouth Road, Falkirk, with Falkirk Forth Valley College to enable road improvements to be undertaken. And so the report describes circumstances of this proposed exchange of land. It's needed to allow the A904 to be widened to create a dual carriageway on all the approaches to the Westfield roundabout, which is a major source of congestion and inhibition to the developments in that area. and we're hoping to progress with that work during next year. And there will be a report coming to the executive relating to the TIF with more detail on that. But in order to proceed with that, we need to acquire some additional land, and that relates to a piece of ground fronting Grangemouth Road that is in the ownership of Forth Valley College. They are keen to take an existing strip of land that's in our ownership directly in front of the new college, and they would receive that into their ownership and take responsibility for its the landscaping and maintenance. The terms of this transaction have been subject of negotiation through the district valuer. The council-owned site valued at 42,500, the college-owned site valued at 56,000, and therefore there's a difference of 13,500, which would be met by us through the TIF budget, and would allow that transaction to proceed. So we're asking that the executive agrees to declare the land at Grangemouth Road, Falkirk, in our ownership as surplus, and agree to dispose to it to the Forth Valley College, and also that we acquire the ground in their ownership to allow this work to proceed. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Douglas. Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, Convener, this is a good example of two partners getting together and, sorting something out that benefits both. So for me, it's a no-brainer. It's quite straightforward and something that I'm happy to move the recommendations contained within the report.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Is there any questions or comments from members? Councillor Reid.
Just taking the opportunity to ask about the proposed improvements at the Klondike. Are these ready to begin? I think that precedes the Middlefield one, doesn't it? I'd heard that geologists were on that site at the moment. So.
Yeah, there's a works planned, and we're going to bring a report forward on the TIF to the next meeting, just to give further details on those that are planned. It's quite a complex situation there, and there is work having to take place to manage the relationship between the works to upgrade the road and also the works necessary and being planned for the provision of the flood protection scheme. And so, quite an intense piece of work underway just now to test out the ground conditions, the location of the utilities and so on down in that location, and also to attend to the issues recently with the flooding that took place down there. So yes, a lot of our officer time being spent in that location just to resolve the orientation of these pieces of work, but we do hope to get that underway quite soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you. Okay, we all agreed, able to agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you very much, folks. And that brings us to the end of this morning's executive. I thank everybody for their time and their contributions this morning. Thank you.